Despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralyzed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history. That's why this morning I advised the Governor-General that we need a new session of Parliament. I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
As you just heard, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has decided to resign from Parliament, and he didn't make that decision alone. In fact, there's been growing pressure from within his own Liberal Party for him to step down. Now, just to give you a sense of Trudeau's lack of popularity, Newsweek notes that President-elect Donald Trump's favorability is double that of Justin Trudeau's, and momentum in support for his exit began to grow following the resignation of his finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, on December 16th. Now, what's interesting about that story is that she actually criticized Trudeau's policy plans in her resignation letter, which ended up becoming public. And the other thing that's really fascinating is prior to her public resignation, there was a Zoom call in which he said that he intended to basically oust her from her position. So she resigned right before she was set to deliver a major address on the state of the nation's finances. And to be sure, the economic conditions for working class people in Canada is a main reason why there's been discontent in the country in regard to Trudeau's leadership. So we'll get to those details in just a minute. Now, prior to her resignation, again, Trudeau told her that he planned to remove her from her post during a Zoom call. And the details of that ended up going public. And he told her that he planned to fire her even though he had no replacement in mind. Now, the higher cost of living in Canada has become a huge issue. In fact, if you look at what the people of Canada have been complaining about, there are a lot of parallels between Canada and the United States, especially when it comes to issues like housing affordability, inflation, and even immigration. And so in addition to that, according to Charlton University professor Fen Hampson, Fen says that the second major factor was the increase in immigration as the Trudeau government sought to boost the number of migrants in an attempt to lower Canada's median age. That wasn't the only reason why they kind of opened up the country to more immigration following the COVID-19 pandemic. Much like the United States, there was a labor shortage. There were shutdowns. Those shutdowns led to disruptions in companies, in the employment within those companies. And when things started to open up again, well, some people had moved on to different fields of work. And so a labor shortage was a problem. And so they opened up the country and allowed more immigrants in as a result of that. But even Trudeau himself is now arguing that they went a little too far. I'll give you some details on that in just a moment. But others are also arguing that Trudeau's so-called wokeness is what destroyed support toward his leadership. That includes Stephen Marsh, who's a Toronto-based author who covers Justin Trudeau for several publications here in the United States. He says that, quote, "I know the term is very loaded, but he was Captain Woke, and the world has really, really turned against wokeness in a very, very deep way." Another individual who is dead set on pinpointing this issue and his ouster to wokeness is Piers Morgan. Here he is on his own show this morning.
Justin Trudeau was about as woke as you could possibly get. I think we got a clip of him where a student tries to use the word mankind and Trudeau interrupts. Let's take a look.
Unfortunately, in Canada, our volunteering as a charitable religious organization is extremely difficult. Extremely. That's why in actuality, we cannot do free volunteering to help our neighbors in need as we truly desire. So that's why we came here today to ask you to also look into the policies that religious charitable organizations have in our legislation so that it can also be changed, because maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to look into
we
that.
like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind.
The last thing I want to learn is that we can't use mankind.
But on that very same panel, Batya Ungar-Sargon, I think, made a really great point about what's really front and center of the disapproval rating that the Canadian people have given to Justin Trudeau and his leadership. Take a look.
I am a little bit of a woke analysis skeptic here. I think we are in a populist moment, like Cenk said, where left and right are coming together. This moment is the working class versus the elites. And the working class, yeah, they don't like the wokeness, but they don't vote on that stuff. They are voting on their pocketbooks. They are voting on immigration, which, if you are working class, is an economic issue. This is what I learned when I traveled the country for a year interviewing working class people for my book, Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. I found that people did have conservative views on woke issues, but much more important to them were, first of all, a very tolerant view when it came to racial issues, when it came to gay issues. They didn't want to see intolerance. They didn't support abortion bans, even when they themselves were pro-life. But also, immigration and economics were one and the same thing, and that's what you're seeing here. To me, Trudeau is being punished now for his COVID overreach, for his liberal authoritarianism that really hurt working class people.
And that panel, did have a really interesting discussion on this issue. Vinny jumped in with some good points as well, but so did you, Cenk. You made a point about how there was really this revolt against incumbents during this, past year. Even if you're talking about, more conservative or right-wing leaders, in those cases, the people of their country, revolted against them. It was almost like this populist uprising that we've seen across the country. But I'm curious what you think about the woke versus economic frustration argument. I mean, I don't know why it can't just be both, but that's my take on it. But what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that it's both, and I'm sure that one is more important than the other. But what I found most interesting about that panel on Piers this morning, oftentimes when we show our prediction clips or past clips, there's a game where people go, "Oh, hey, Cenk's wearing the same outfit." Well, this one is because that was today, right? And today on that panel, what I saw was a blurring of all political lines. You couldn't tell who was left and who was right. We almost all agreed that the number one issue is economics and populism. And Batya and I have engaged in giant debates in the past, but I think that Piers thought that she was a left winger when she's not. But you really couldn't tell, because the core of this issue is not our disagreement about things that are woke or not woke, right? The core is our agreement that the people are not being served, whether it's in Canada or in America. Canada had a bigger inflation problem than we did. Trudeau bungled a lot of things politically to the point that you mentioned in the beginning, Anna. So Freeland, the finance minister, he was going to fire her, and he told her that in that Zoom call that you referred to, but he didn't have a backup plan yet. So she just jumped out and resigned before he could fire her publicly and blamed it on him. I mean, that is classic bungling from a political perspective. And so he had a good run because Canadians are generally very progressive, especially compared to Americans, right? So I think that's why the woke argument in Canada works even less. And so are some people annoyed by saying people kind instead of mankind? For sure, right? Look, honestly, I'm a little annoyed by it. And it's not because like I think, oh, men should be in charge and we should always be. No, it's just a word that people use. Of course they mean all humanity, right? So I can see how that would get under some people's skin, but it's mainly conservatives that it bothers. Mainly they were gonna be against Trudeau anyway. And here in America, as Batya pointed out, that still was not close to the largest issue. The largest issue is always economics. Why? Because it affects people's lives so much more than any other issue. And in that government, they didn't do a great job of handling it either. And one last thing, Anna, that's so important to this context, and as you pointed out, the main point that I made is it's not about left or right. You could show, and as we've done on the Young Turks here over and over again, voters internationally choosing left instead of right. And in fact, they chose Biden instead of Trump, even though Biden certainly doesn't look like change, right? Back in 2020. And that's because they're constantly voting out incumbents because they hate this neoliberal system that we're all living under all across the world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And what I thought was really interesting were the parallels between the frustrations that Americans have been voicing and the frustrations that Canadians are voicing. Now, look, I'm not gonna pretend like there isn't a component of, and I don't think that it represents most people who have been speaking out against the migration crisis, but unfortunately, there is a small percentage of people who say gross, hateful, nefarious things about migrants. But I think the vast majority of people in the United States who are concerned about the migrant crisis are concerned about, the fact that we don't have finite resources. And even HUD, under the Biden administration, came out with their report indicating that what exacerbated homelessness between 2023 and 2024 was the influx of migrants coming into the country at a time when we have low stock of housing available. And something very similar is happening in Canada as well. So based on some of their reporting, government reports, in fact, there is a shortage of housing. So let's talk a little bit about how many migrants have come in and what the shortage of housing looks like. So the number of international students, for instance, grew 30% from 2022 to 2023, according to the Canadian Bureau for International Education. Meanwhile, government data shows that the number of temporary foreign workers in Canada has doubled in the last 5 years. And so as the economy was kind of stabilizing and as more, Canadian citizens were looking for work, they were running into similar issues as the one that's currently being debated in regard to H-1B visas here in the United States. And so Justin Trudeau himself just 2 days ago put out a video confessing that they went a little too far in opening up the country to immigration. And he says that now they're implementing new restrictions when it comes to its so-called express entry program for high-skilled immigrants. And they're also trying to decrease the number of permanent immigrants coming into the country as well. So permanent immigration has also grown in the country, as you can imagine. Trudeau and Immigration Minister Mark Miller presented their most stringent immigration cutbacks yet, which would amount to a 21% reduction of permanent residents accepted into the country this year in 2025. And in regard to the housing shortage, it is pretty severe in Canada, much like here in the United States. Home prices have ballooned a whopping 30% in Canada since 2020. And according to a report by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, PBO, Canada needs an additional 3.1 million homes by 2030 in order to address the current housing crisis. We need 3 to 4 million homes right now, not by 2030, literally right now. So the problem is more pronounced here in the United States, but nonetheless, it's still an issue in Canada. So any comment on that before I talk a little bit about what's gonna happen next, politically speaking, in Canada?
Yeah, I do want to give voice to some of our members talking about what's next and Biden in a second too. But yeah, on this, Anna, look, I think woke and immigration are actually similar in a way that people don't realize. Because I think the underlying issue is for some people, they're really discomforted by change. So when they see the demographics of their country changing, they're bothered by it. When they see words changing, they're bothered by it. And as I've explained before, I understand I'm a super nostalgic guy and I'm conservative by nature, but not in politics. So I get that being discomforted. And so that's partly what happened in Canada and here in the US. But again, all of that is, and by the way, I'm not justifying it. I'm an immigrant. I changed the demographics of this country, and I think immigrants greatly improve both countries. But I'm just explaining why it happens, right? But again, it pales in comparison to housing prices and inflation overall. Those are gigantic issues. As James Carville pointed out in a New York Times op-ed he did a couple of days ago, and it was great to see because he's, in a lot of ways as establishment as it gets, having worked with Bill Clinton, et cetera. He said, we got to go to populism and we got to go back to what we focused on in the first Clinton campaign, which is it's the economy, stupid. Because, and this is a great point that he made that I wanted to emphasize. He said, an average person has 3 to 5 interactions at least a day with the economy. When they go to buy milk, when they go to pay their rent, when they go to buy gas, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the thing that is most relevant in their lives over and over again on a daily basis. Whereas foreign policy is abstract, even things like being woke, et cetera, is less of an issue because they interact with it less, right? Although it might go to core identity issues, et cetera. So it's the focus on the economy is always got to be paramount. But Anna, that leads to the number one problem that you and I talk about all the time on the show, which is that for the political class, they're so obsessed with the donors and with a neoliberal way of thinking that they can't do the populist policies that the citizens are in favor of because they're blocked by the elites. So they're in this constant friction of serving the elites who got them into power versus serving the voters. They almost always choose the elites, and that's why the voters are throwing out all of the incumbents, whether they're on the left or the right.
So let's move on to what happens next with the political system in Canada. So he's not going to resign right away. It doesn't work exactly like that. So here's what we do know. So Trudeau, basically the Liberal Party, since Trudeau is stepping down from his leadership role as Prime Minister, the Liberal Party, the party that he is from, will now engage in that robust competitive process to find the new leader of the party. And then that individual will face off with the individual from the Conservative Party, who actually at the moment has a massive lead over Justin Trudeau. So I guess the thinking is maybe the Liberal Party can find a leader that has a little more favorability with the Canadian people. So it could actually be a competitive race between whoever that person ends up being and the leader for the Conservative Party. Also, in a move that gives Liberals more time to settle on a new candidate, Justin Trudeau said Governor General Mary Simon granted his request to prorogue Parliament, placing it out of session until March 24th. So what does that mean? Prorogation effectively allows the Prime Minister to hit pause on Parliament. The government remains in power, but all parliamentary activity from existing bills and committee work to studies and investigations come to a halt. But 2025 was poised to be an election year anyway. Trudeau and the Liberals had been on track to remain in power until this year, until a deal struck in 2022 with the leftist opposition, the New Democratic Party. And Canada's general election was initially set to take place in October of this year. Now it's more likely to happen in the spring of this year.
Yeah. So one of our members on Twitch, Jonathan Hahn, wrote in, Trudeau's doing what Biden should have done. And another member on tyt.com, Dirge, wrote in, unlike Biden, Trudeau knows when he is unpopular. Look, that's relevant, and thank you for writing in, and become a member by hitting the join button below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you want to get all your content on tyt.com, that's a great place to sign up. So he's giving time for his own party to find someone else, and he's not even 98 or however old Biden is, right? He's only 53, but he's so unpopular, he realizes he can't come back from those numbers. And if you remember, when I started doing the petition like 15 months ago to drive Biden out, age was a huge factor in it, but his popularity was an even bigger factor. That was the number one factor. I kept talking about how if your numbers are in the 30s as an incumbent, you have no chance of winning. And Trudeau realized that, unlike Joe Biden. So he's doing the selfless thing here, which honestly, you have to give him some degree of credit for, because politicians almost never do that. And usually, especially in our country, and usually he'll think, oh, I've got a year to take it from, to double my numbers, triple my numbers. Joe Biden would have never done that. He didn't do that, and he didn't do it, and he was in much worse shape than Trudeau. He didn't do it until the last possible second, and it hurt his party and his country greatly. So at least Trudeau is doing something patriotic here and right for his party by saying, hey, let's figure out who can lead here and who could actually beat the other side, and let's give them an opportunity to do that. So he's not taking any rash actions and stepping down now and leaving his party in the lurch. So I appreciate that. So because guys, electing we're talking about how everybody's throwing out incumbents, and I understand that urge completely. And in primaries, by the way, you should definitely do that with almost everyone who's a Democrat or Republican, almost everyone. But when it comes to the general election, it doesn't necessarily solve anything, because if you just put in a conservative who's even more in favor of the donor class or the wealthy or the elites, that's not really gonna help you. So I hope that the liberals in Canada find a strong populist leader who's going to drive towards positive change for the actual citizens of Canada, and they'll be far better off going in that direction.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.